Olha que coisa mais linda, mais cheia de graça. É essa menina que vem, que passa, no doce balança, caminho do mar. Moça do corpo dourado do...
From the United States to Europe, to Africa, to Latin America, there is a change happening.
A feeling that is evolving and making us more attuned, not just to other cultures, but to our own.
As we traveled around the world on Semester at Sea's Atlantic exploration voyage, we anticipated more modernization, more westernization, less localism, and more globalism.
I personally don't think necessarily that globalization threatens a kind of bland cultural homogeneity. I think we're likely to be living in a world of cultural difference, for a very long time into the future. I'm not denying that there is some tendency to homogeneity, but it's a matter of how far it's going to go. And my own feeling is that there's a limit. There is strong resistance, to losing one's own sense of identity. And I suppose that's the fundamental issue, isn't it, in identity. We all identify with certain institutions, don't we? Maybe the family, and maybe your local church, maybe your local soccer team, maybe the nation you live in. And because you identify in that way, and you have a loyalty to that, that protects difference, by actually identifying with an institution, you do protect difference.
Just as Dr. White suggested, we found that local cultures and traditions remain strong influences in all of the countries we visited. However, alongside valuing their own cultural traditions, we also discovered a trend of increased awareness of globalization and the necessity it creates for intercultural skills.
These skills are essential for actively participating in this globalized world.
For instance, we saw this trend exemplified in both Spain and Ghana through the teaching of English alongside cultural traditions.
People in these countries recognize the necessity of learning new languages to participate in a globalized society.
What kind of clubs and organizations were you involved in? Like, did you do sports or after-school activities?
Cuando era pequeña, sí. Hacía ballet, flamenco. También iba a academias de inglés.
Just as traditional cultural institutions like flamenco are taught alongside English in Spain, this school teacher from Togorme in Ghana showed that similar cultural dualities are taught in her school as well.
We start learning with this, and I will sing the song to you. Kofi, kofi na de futo, e mulani de futa me, ya fa fe le fofo nye, e nge godu le nu me klang, 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 klang.
In Ghana, local culture is taught in tandem with an imported language. Teaching involves learning songs in their local language as well as learning English, the official language.
In the Langa Township in Cape Town, South Africa, we met a young man named Nati who works for a program called the Happy Feet Youth Project. Nati and a friend of his founded the project to help keep kids from their township off the street and away from drugs and alcohol. The program's focus is to teach traditional dancing, but it also provides a place for them to practice their English and work with kids of all ages.
Dance as well, which is part of, where we have an after-school project that teach children about dance, the South African traditional dance called Gambu dance. That are from locally formed, like the one I mentioned before, the one I'm involved in, Happy Feet Youth Project, which was started locally and still run by local people. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
From these kids who participate in Happy Feet Youth Project in South African communities to the culture taught in Ghana, we saw examples in all the countries we visited of young people embracing and celebrating their own culture, showing how they value their own traditions.
The way things are going to be going is that we're going to be seeing an increasing divergence of enacted culture or behaved culture and cultural identity. People's hunger to maintain a distinctive sense of who they are and to be clear about that is sometimes an unbelievably powerful need, and people will maintain a distinct cultural identity for a long period of time because they need it. They don't want to be gobbled up by a larger surrounding culture. They still need this very strong.
Sardis, a tour guide from Manaus, Brazil, helped us understand this trend of reconnecting with culture.
Okay.
But like 20 years ago, it was more American music.
20 years ago? But you'd say it became more
Brazilian. We started to pay attention more to Brazilian songs in the last 20 years. So today we are very concentrated in Brazilian.
Why would you say that happened?
The change?
Yeah.
Actually, it was not a change. It was there was interruption after the big world wars. Because we had to get together with other soldiers, and they brought a lot of culture from the United States, from Europe and stuff. But after that, Brazil started growing again, and then the government's paying really attention to the culture. The culture is more important in the Brazilian government in this.
Yeah, thank God we live in a different world now, where in fact we have access, to what other people do. And I think we glory in what other people do, don't we? We love it. That's why we're on this ship. That's why we're going around the world, because we want to see how other people behave, and we learn from that. Much about that, getting access to other people's diversity, as it is to actually removing my difference. Globalization, with the communications revolution, which encourages globalization, is that we see what's happening elsewhere. And that really is enriching. It enriches our lives.
And we are really paying attention for the things that it's ours. And it's mixed part. Manaus has a cultural festival every year that receives theatrical plays from all over the world. We have orchestras playing Manaus, so we are very, very cultural in this part as well.
After visiting these countries in Africa and Latin America, it seemed to us that there was less of an emphasis on cultural traditions in the U.S. and in the European countries we visited. However, we realized that culture in the Western world is often passed on through more everyday, implicit activities, and therefore its influence may not be as obvious. These societies place a much higher value on individualism rather than collectivism. They pass on values central to this individualistic identity as children watch adults and imitate their actions during daily activities. This modeling can teach values, such as responsibility.
Learning. When I'm doing my laundry, he helps with taking everything out of the box and in the box.
Very nice.
So like little jobs. When I'm sweeping the floor, he's sweeping with me with a little one. So little things.
Váyanse preparando, ay váyanse preparando, que con esto va a salir bucala.
Culture get very confused, so people think the way you behave and what you think you are one and the same thing, and it's not true at all. They're very, very independent. We've discussed that in class, that many people can be think of themselves as American and say I'm just American, but who knows, they can even be still depicting traditional German values or patterns in their own home 4 generations after the family left Germany, if there's been some continued intermarriage and preservation of the culture, but there's no identity remaining. That's the American tradition.
However, there is a growing movement in the U.S. towards the more explicit teaching of cultural traditions, which is especially evident with minority groups. This is illustrated by the increasing popularity of teaching step in the United States.
I think it's important to me because it enables me to share my culture with individuals who may not be familiar with it or don't understand it. And for those who are just curious and just want to know more about stepping and Black Greek fraternities and sororities, or even the culture of African Americans. So like it brings me joy to be able to share that with individuals. The first known step was done by they call it the gumboot dance, and it was actually a dance that was performed by the gold mine workers in South Africa. So when they worked in the mines, they worked under the most harsh conditions. So they had to wear these boots that's known as Wellington boots, these huge rubber boots that come up to your knees. And what they would do is, because they weren't allowed to talk, a lot of times they would communicate with the way they slapped the side of their boots and stumped their feet. So it's kind of used as a Morse code for them. And a man by the name of Kwame Nkrumah, so what he did was he brought that tradition over to the U.S. And the reason why we do it actually comes from the indigenous West African traditions, the same symbolism that our ancestors used in the West African indigenous traditions.
And the more of these cultures we experienced, the more we realized.
Our world is not just becoming more globalized, it is becoming more respectful of the distinctness and uniqueness of our varied cultures. And it is the less developed countries with their fine example of cultural preservation who are influencing the developed countries to return to their roots,
to cherish our traditions and where we come from. In Argentina, we met a woman named Lorena who eloquently summed up what we felt the overall message of our research was. She envisioned a global world in which we take pride in our own culture, but also celebrate the cultures of others.
Creo que las personas llegaron al cambio cuando comprendan que compartir es lo más importante de la cultura y que lo hace a sí misma. Así terminaron los sueños, ya lo ha dicho John Lennon en Imagine. I believe that people come to change when they understand how important it is to share culture and to see what makes them the same. That's how dreams are realized, like John Lennon said in Imagine.